Dick Proenneke built the cabin, he had concerns about where to locate the cabin because he knows that water levels in Alaska can change very drastically when rains come. So earlier in the summer, you get a lot of rain up in the mountains. That water level in that lake can go up by the foot in a matter of just a few hours. It looks inside just like it did the day that Dick Proenneke probably left the cabin. Beds are made, there's furniture inside the cabin is still there, both inside and outside, because he made workbenches and tables outdoors, and they set those things up so you can see what it looked like. All of his tools inside the cabin are still there, from the snowshoes to the books that he read, where he kept all of his food, all of the staples that he kept, they're still there. Then he's also got his workshop, so you can go on and look at the workshop area where he's got another big collection of tools, from hand augers to hand saws to axes. These were the tools that he had to have in order to build the cabin in the first place. So, and the story of him building the cabin in and of itself is pretty amazing for a man to, at the age of 51, to decide that he was going to move to a place in Alaska where nobody else lives and is only accessible by float plane, and build a home from scratch was pretty amazing. There aren't too many 21 or 30-year-olds who could probably handle the physical demands of doing what he did, but he built the cabin in one summer. It has a very diverse and rich population of wildlife. When you're there in the summertime visiting the cabin, what you see flying in and flying out is worth the trip in and of itself. This place is going to draw fishermen. This place is going to draw explorers, photographers, people who are just interested in the history of Alaska. So if you're an Alaska historian, if you're somebody that really wants to understand what Alaska is all about, Alaska is all about the people that were like Dick Proenneke, who moved up there when there weren't very many people living in that entire state, and put up with a lot of hardship and a lot of very difficult times. You got to be a special person to do that. Sit at his desk and look out the window, which looks right onto the lake. It's a spectacular view. I can just only imagine what it must have been like to live there, especially when the weather started to change in the fall and winter started to come, and listening to the sounds of the lake as it freezes, and then the sounds of the lake in the spring when it thaws, because that ice makes incredibly massive noises. And to hear him talk in his book about watching the lake thaw in the spring and then finally break up, and the sounds that the ice would make is things you just don't think about. But when he talked about walking out on the lake right in front of his cabin, which is the same lake that we land in the summertime in a float plane and the water's lapping up on the shore, and for him to walk out on the lake and walk out 100 yards, 50 yards on the lake, and the ice was 4 feet thick. It's almost hard to comprehend how those lakes up there, how a lake like that can transform as dramatically as it does between summer and winter. So, of course, in the wintertime, getting around up there is actually easier than in the summertime, because walking across the lake is a pretty simple thing to do. Probably easier than getting in this canoe and canoeing to the other end of the lake or canoeing around the lake. So, especially when the wind comes up in a canoe, when the wind comes up, it can become real challenging to move around on the water when suddenly you've got 2-foot waves on the lake. And one of the things that he talks about having to learn to cope with was just being able to judge when the weather was going to change and to not get caught someplace where he did not want to be caught. He had to get back to shelter. He had to get back to the cabin. So, where number one, he was out of the weather, and number two, he had a fire where he could get warm. So, I think of living in that kind of weather out there with nothing but your stove and the firewood that you've chopped all summer, because that's another thing that you have to do all the time. You're always cutting wood because you go through a lot of wood in a winter when that's your only source of heating and your only source of cooking. So, and looking at the fireplace that he built inside the cabin, the rock fireplace is amazing. That he built this fireplace all by hand. And like I said, it's an incredible work of art, what he did. So, and I think it's definitely, if somebody is fly out fishing for the day in Lake Clark, to stop at this cabin and check it out. Get out your camera, even if it's your cell phone or if it's your video camera or your fancy still picture camera, your DSLR. Take pictures of this thing because it's very special. It's one of these things that the more you think about, the more amazed you are. So I think you kind of have to get into how that thing got there. I mean, this wasn't a kit that somebody flew in and put up in 3 or 4 days. This was something that started out as trees in the forest and ended up as a house. So I think it's not what you got there, it's the story behind what you see. So that's what you have to take away from it. And aside from the fact that this was an extraordinary man who donated the home of his. He homesteaded that land back in the 60s, but when it was turned into a national park, no more homesteading is allowed in a national park. But he still owned the land, it was still his. So he donated and turned the whole thing over to the National Park Service, and the only thing they had to do was to take care of it, and that's what they do. So it's there for posterity, and it's there for people to come in and enjoy what a real mountain man did.